I recently saw a quote and it's, culture doesn't live in a place, it lives within our lives. So how do we continue adding on to that culture is a question that I have for you, for all of you.
Interesting question in the sense that we never expect things to be monolithic in game dev. Things should be quite fluid. Yes, even company values will change, company core values will change, and culture will change, and good companies will usually make a whole branding out of it so that it's not out of place.
With the experience you've got between the three of you, I think there are some very interesting topics, particularly focused around production, culture.
Yeah, the topic I choose for today's talk is integrity versus skill. So basically, when we hire additional members, do we look for the integrity of those new hires, or do we look at the skill they can add?
You said if it's personality, you step away. How do you go about assessing that personality?
It depends on what kind of feeling you get during the interview, right? If there's some very, very strong red flags, right, I would just dive into that question again. I said, okay.
Well, welcome to Pixel Perspective, round 2. As I must say, we've done this previously and we're going again. Look, once again, thank you for hopping on to this call with me. I'm your host, Selim Ozturk. As you all know me, I've got a star-studded lineup with the likes of Lisa, Onurhan, and Fatih, which have become close acquaintances over the years. So I want to give the floor to you folks to introduce yourselves and let's get started. Fatih?
Hello, my name is Fatih. Fatih Özbayram is the full name. There is a funny story to tell about my name quickly here, because I'm living in Antalya. I made the move almost a year ago, well, more than a year ago. And I meet non-native speaking people as well, and they have a hard time to remember my name. So I say I'm conqueror of parties, or as I've simplified for people, I call myself party animal. Easy to remember. And that's basically a running gag since I'm living in Antalya and I meet non-Turkish people. Anyway, Fatih Özbayram is the name. I am with Credit since 2009, a long marriage for our industry, which is not very typical, I would say. For the last 12 years, I have been in managerial roles. The technical title for the last 8 years has been lead producer. I'm working on Showdown, which has been released as an early access title, and then has seen in 2019 its full release on PC first, followed by Xbox, and then 2020 it has been released on PlayStation. Since then, I'm basically working with leadership members to define what we want to bring to our community, to engage them and to make them excited. Alongside with the production team, I'm planning out what can be achieved up to which point and with which team setup we need, basically. Before working on Showdown, I did collaborate with Onurhan and Lisa on the VR titles Crytek did. The Climb and Robinson the Journey have been those two titles with Onurhan and Lisa. And obviously after that, I did Climb 2. And before getting my hands on VR, I have helped Crytek to get its first free-to-play title on mobile. It was called The Collectibles, which was basically worked out of Budapest. That was the dev team, and DNA has been our publisher back then. And that's me. That's basically me running things at Crytek from the first row. Very excited to see what we're up to today.
Thank you. Onurhan?
Hi, everyone. I'm Onurhan. I'm very happy to be here again. There's a behind-the-scenes story for that. I'll let Selim produce that one later. But as Fatih mentioned, I'm among friends and colleagues. I've been in game dev since roughly 13 years now. Did a whole lot of things as somebody who was 60-70% in production and 30% the rest in publishing, all the while always skirting the lines in between everybody else, basically. A lot of game production, a lot of stakeholder management, and I was lucky enough to having had stakeholders actually and colleagues Fatih and Lisa. Did many kinds of games. I was lucky enough to work on social casual games back in the heyday of Facebook and Facebook Games Rising, early 2010. Then I was in Crytek Istanbul working for Warface, which is still ongoing, which always has been a successful product in its own measure. That led me to Frankfurt, which was really cool. And I had the opportunity to do with Fatih and Lisa, new tech like VR games. Two of them, always proud of them. They were amazing beyond their time. Then last, I've been the development director in Black Forest Games. Had the opportunity to work with, again, great team, great publisher. Learned a lot about remakes, original stuff, co-development, porting. And for the last year or so, I've been on a sabbatical. It's kind of I was fortunate enough to be able to say, like, look, I'm going to rest a bit. And I've been helping out. I call it giving back to the community because people gave me a chance to go into gaming back in the day. And anybody who watches this, feel free to contact me on LinkedIn, like for mentorship, CV reviews, whatever is gonna help you figure out an answer to a solution. I'm happy to do that. I also, throughout this time, I also had the opportunity to meet new and very inspiring and very driven, very passionate, like smaller teams as well, especially in the Turkish scene. There's a beautiful burgeoning Turkish scene in the last 2 years or so. A lot of know-how from hyper casual, mobile, etc. kind of started switching to let's do like PC, Steam, let's go in that direction. Multi-platform is also coming up as well. And, we have one proof of that rise here among us too. And like I said, happy to be here. Looking forward to it.
Thank you so much, and Lisa, upon request. Merhabalar.
Hi. Yeah, exactly. Instead of ladies first, I go last today. Thank you again for having us, Selim, and it's super great to see you, Fatih and Onurhan. My name is Lisa, Lisa Kretschmer, but I don't expect you to know how to pronounce that, İyi yaşa, if you try. So I'm studio manager at IO Interactive here in Istanbul. So this is also a recent change for me because for the last a bit more than 10 years, I've also been in production as a producer, project manager, development manager, whatever you want to call it, in the games industry. So I met the two of them, Fatih and Onurhan, at Crytek. Then I worked at Electronic Arts in the UK and then at Ubisoft Massive in Sweden. And now I'm here in sunny Istanbul. So this is my little world tour that I'm doing right now. And I stepped out of production and into studio management, studio operations, because I wanted to learn a bit more about general management and support the teams still, but in a different way. Yeah, I think I started my gaming journey 2008 when I started studying animation and game, but then I also started working as a side job in games in 2009 at Konami and also at a small QA company. So it has been a while, and I'm very excited to talk here about these experiences.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it and grateful that you're all here. With the experience you've got between the three of you, I think there are some very interesting topics, particularly focused around production, culture, etc. And look, I'll give the floor to Fatih to start talking about the first topic we've got. Over to you, Fatih.
Yeah, the topic I choose for today's talk is integrity versus skill. So basically, when we hire additional members, do we look for the integrity of those new hires, or do we look at the skill they can add? Or to rephrase it, actually, should we champion our strengths or weaknesses? Because sometimes, and that's where I'm coming from, you might have a candidate that is the opposite of what culture you have, the way you operate, but is a required skill. And then that triggers the question, hey, there is a weakness because the weakness is coming from we work different versus what the candidate will bring to the table. It can turn to a strength or even deepen our weakness, so to speak. So what I want to know, and I can start from my perspective, what do I look at when I start or try to recruit somebody? Obviously, there is a thin line between those two because you need skill and you need integrity. It's not black-white. You can't just make skill more valued than integrity, vice versa, integrity valued more than skill. From a hiring perspective, the first question I ask is, okay, does this person feel complementary to what we have in regards to how we operate, what culture we live, and how we work? That starts with processes, tools, it goes over to mindset, it goes over to the personality, because at the end of the day, we all know that's the truth. A product is an outcome of a collective and not of individual souls. On the other hand, you might find this person who is very skilled, who doesn't integrate well with the rest, which can be an opportunity as well, right? You might have a very comfortable team structure where everybody gets along, and then there is this rock star that you get to hire that might cause people to leave their comfort zone and maybe try out something new. And for me, basically, the first question is always, does it integrate, and up to what degree? It doesn't need to be 100% match, but it needs to be more than 50 or 60% by my books at least. And then, is the skill set critical? Yes. And what does the skill set bring in terms of changes? For example, if it's a different time zone, and I mean, Crytek has been operating for the majority of its time for the last 3 years in different time zones, right? We hired people in the US, we hired people in Asia, and we have realized having an overlap throughout the day, which is an important aspect to build a team and to act as a team, was critical. So we did hire people around time zones where we would have at least 4 to 5 hours together throughout the day, which is the integrity part, basically, where you take into account how much collaboration can I achieve with this person who's a critical skill set outside of my comfort zone, which is the time zone in this case. And then we have also hired skills that have approached it differently mindset-wise, right? They have not, they have had a different approach, how they prioritize things, how they value things, what we consider as critical, they have seen as lower importance compared to something we might have considered as lower importance has been higher priority for them. And that's the challenge, really. And I would want to know from the room here, what do you watch out when you hire somebody? Is it integrity, the skill? Is it a combination of both? Or is it something else you look for when you hire?
Good question. I jump in.
Jump in.
I'm thinking about it, especially currently in my situation where I'm in right now. And right now we're just building a team. So we have a small team here on site in Istanbul. And there I very much look for the team fit. Because if it's a small team and you disrupt it too much with a personality that completely clashes or a way of working completely clashes, it would disrupt too much and would block the team too much. That's not to say that, a bit of chaos can inspire something beautiful and new, right? So I think it also depends on the timeline. Where are you in the project? Can you allow yourself a fallback potentially, right? And the clashes. So I think what I really struggle with is hiring someone when I already have a feeling the personality will not work out. So personality is someone where I have to say, I probably would step away. But if it's process, right? I think there I can find ways to make it work. So if it's a process, or if it's then I would say skill set is something I might try out. But if it's personality, I would step away from, especially in a very small team that I have right now. If it's, as you say, for example, a very remote company setup, maybe something to explore. Maybe I'm a bit extra cautious with this right now. But I think in the end, it's like you said, do the benefits outweigh the risk, the negatives? That's what I would say.
Just on that, Lisa, you said if it's personality, you step away. How do you go about assessing that personality?
It's a very good question. Very good question. And I think it also depends on what kind of feeling do you get during the interview, right? If there's some very, very strong red flags, right? I would just dive into that question again and said, okay, you mentioned this or that. Can you elaborate this again? And maybe ask them to describe some situations and some outcomes of conversations they had. Or we usually ask things like, okay, what was the most challenging thing you experienced at work? Would you do it the same way? What do you learn from it, etc.? Just to gauge a little bit. Maybe was this a one-time occurrence? Is this something they would do again exactly the same way, just to feel the personality a little bit? And in an ideal world, we also have the chance to do an on-site interview, right? Because this is also a very good way to feel the feel, see how the person is and how they vibe with the whole team.
Yeah, really good point there, because given that you're all from similar backgrounds in production, one of the most common questions that I find in production interviews is, how do you handle conflicts within a team? And you get, Onurhan's laughing at this, is how have they handled conflict between other team members? Or if they've had conflict between themselves and someone else, how do they manage it? And it's all about finding a happy medium to get the best out of people, which I find then opens up the surface to seeing someone's personality. So no, I appreciate that.
But I have to say, I'm really talking about red flags, right? Not
Yeah,
everybody has to be friends. Not everybody has to get
of course
along
not.
100%, because, you know, we sometimes also need to disagree to advance, right? But I think the main point is that if it's really a red flag, then I would probably step away from it. And it also wouldn't do the person that we are about to hire a favor, right? Because then they will also maybe relocate even, right? And then join an atmosphere where they also feel, okay, somehow we don't connect. So I think it wouldn't do each party a favor.
I think that's a
I
good
agree.
remark, because integrity can be a lot of things, right? The process, how you work, as we mentioned, the tool you use. In my perspective, the process and tools can both be learned. Even if you haven't been exposed to a certain tool set, for example, that can be easily picked up. Process is a similar thing, by my books at least. Every company does Scrum different, if that makes sense, right? So you have to just find the way how they operate it versus how you operate, and what is the middle ground to set both to success. But personality is a good aspect to it, because in my interview process, I do pay attention to personality. It does start with what is your favorite game, movie, and why is it your favorite movie and game, to see does it connect with the rest. How is somebody outspoken about their thoughts, right? It's not about the right answer or the correct answer that you might want to hear as a hiring manager. It's more like, hey, is he authentic? Or he, she being authentic? How is the way of talking? Is it chilled, relaxed, or is it stressful, nervous, right? Because that might give you a lot ideas how somebody operates in stressful times. Also, like, is somebody picking up people's name? Because I had that with one of my interview processes, where somebody would pick up our names, but in a wrong way, and that did cause lauters, because happens, right? Especially if you're not exposed to Turkish names, you might say Faith instead of Fatih. But it is an icebreaker, because you see already that somebody is trying to integrate, right? Integration starts with understanding and approaching, if you ask me. And what I really value is also when people tell about their favorite moments and the mistakes they have done, what value it does add to them, or what did they learn. Sometimes I also tend to ask people, like, if you could travel back to day one and you're starting your career from scratch, what is the advice you would give? And then I hear a long wall of text what people would have changed. For me, it's like, no, you don't change, because you would have not been the person you are today, right? For me, it's more about like, okay, what advice do you give that might even strengthen the knowledge you have today? So yeah, personality is a key aspect hiring. On the same other hand, you said something interesting which I wanted to pick up, because you said the clash of personalities. I mean, at the end of the day, humans are driven by emotions, right? And emotions do cause crash. You might not see that in an interview process, because interview process is limited in time. You have an hour for the first call, and then maybe a few hours together on site or remotely. And then somebody starts, and then boom, you see the first clash happen in personality. I think an important aspect, and that's what you like to do as well, Lisa, is to explain people, hey, how do we operate? What do we want to stand for as a culture? What do we expect? And versus what can you expect, right? And or what do you expect, so that we can tell whether we match or not. And I think being transparent in the interview process about the integration and the mindset and the personality we want, because the skill is there, right? It's a hard fact. You can code C++ for X years. That's a hard skill that you have that you have gained through time. But the soft skills, which we call also the integrity part, isn't something process tools you can learn, but some aspects it's your personality, and we won't be able to change or fix your personality to make it a match with the rest. And I think it's a key aspect to look out and to value in the interview process.
That's interesting. You guys talk about the interview process as part of like understanding the person's integrity, which is very fair and which is kind of the only way before working with them. I'm going to take a step back and look at it from a more mechanical perspective for the first part of my, let's say, thought process about this. The first question I need to ask is always, why am I hiring this person? Meaning, what kind of skill set am I adding into the team or the company, and why am I adding this skill set? The part of the answer of the second why is timing, like Fatih mentioned. And I can give a concrete example of this because I've been through this before. Let's say that you have a very complicated programming or rendering or tech art, my favorite example, tech art problem, and you don't have the in-house talent for that. However, you also know that after the release of that current project, you know that your next project, which is ideally lined up, will not have that problem because it's not going to need that particular function or set of tools that you're already building for this project. So in that case, the spectrum, the scale goes towards more like skill rather than integrity, because I am not at this point making a promise to the company and ideally to the potential employee or teammate that we're going to be working for a long time. So if I'm hiring for someone for, say, 1 year, and even through the interview process, I would more look towards the skill part rather than integrity. However, integrity is an interesting word. It's one of the core values of humans, right? And professionalism is derived from integrity too. If you're a person with high integrity, you will try to do the best in your profession. You will be as professional as possible. So for me, it's a bit of a sliding scale depending on the situation. However, if I'm hiring for long term, if it's an expansion of the team with no end in sight, I would go more towards integrity. In this case, as you all said, the way to understand it during an interview is tricky in the sense that, for example, in production interviews, what I always expect, and as I see as a sign of integrity, is basically the amount of I's versus we's that have been used in the interview process. Like, production is an interesting place to be in. You do everything, kind of. Bad news to everybody who wants to be a producer, but like, you do everything. You work with all kinds of experts, yet from one way of looking at it, you actually don't do anything either, because you don't code, you don't do an artwork, you don't do a design, but you might end up sitting next to the designer for like an hour and then discussing, understanding, getting the right answers from the right questions. And that's part of the job, asking the right questions. So you might feel like you don't do anything. But one thing is, integrity shines there in the way you equally or fairly interact with people too. And I think that's really important when you're doing the hiring as well. Like, because on the other side of the table, there is the company as a corporate person, as it's called in business, sitting. They too have to have integrity. They need to be able to tell you, the best and the easiest example. Your salary is going to be this way because in our company, the ranges work this way. This applies to everybody, and that's fair. That shows integrity as well. So for me, as it's the case with actually all of us coming from production, the answer is situational. And I think it's a sliding scale, but I think that the scale should never go extremely to one side or the other. Hiring someone only for skill means that you're not really hiring them for their growth opportunity. You're hiring them for them to retire. Hiring someone only for integrity is also lacking, because integrity at the end is a value, and values are very subjective. So it's definitely a sliding scale, but the reason why you're hiring should define what you look for, in my opinion.
And that's actually the discussion we had. So the question that I asked, or my topic I picked for today, has been related to, would we hire a rock star even this person wouldn't integrate, and what would be pros and cons? And what you said was the outcome at the end. It's like, for when and for what do we hire, and how much is integrity a key value that we want to obtain in the addition of a new team member? And then the second part was, okay, that rock star quotation mark that referred to might be different than us, but might actually show us a path that we haven't considered yet that we should go at some point as well, right? For example, what I'm trying to say is, if you have a team that is full of comfort zone, has worked together a long period of time, has a pace, has a velocity whatsoever, you might never change that because you feel like, hey, the team is working great. And we have a saying, right? Never change a winning team. But a rock star quotation mark that has been the opposite of what you have stand for so far might show you a new path. It might improve the way you collaborate, how you build trust with your employees, and or best case, it does improve even your velocity, right? Because things are cut, like the wall of text in emails is cut because the new hire has shown you that it can be done in a sentence as well, instead of explaining 5 pages of details, or meetings that we might not need anymore because they weren't meant to be meetings in the first place, right? That might be the aspect where skill can overweight the integrity, but in nuance or in baseline, we all agree integrity is how you build a team versus the skill is how you push a team.
Yeah. And I think what you said is a very good summary, because that's also the reason why in a lot of projects, right, we make these disruptive changes. If something doesn't work, right, then you suddenly bring in a new EP or something to actually change these things that didn't work, and then you definitely look out for skill sets. No.
Yeah.
There was also a point where you were talking about process. I'm a massive believer that process can always be taught, whereas with things such as integrity, integrity is what lives within a person. It's like you were saying, it's a value, but all dependent on what stage, why. You've got to know what your whys are at that point.
Yeah.
Really, really valid points. Next, where are we moving on to? To Lisa. So we've
think
touched
that's-
upon a few things.
Exactly.
Mhm.
So we'll chime it in with Lisa's topic.
Yes, because it already we created a little bridge towards culture as well, and this is what I want to talk about. Obviously motivated by me moving into a new position, into a new studio, into a new country, everything, right? So, and while we're setting up the studio here, I ask myself a lot how to build up a culture with a studio that exists in other countries, right? What do you bring? How do you establish your own footprint, and your own culture, and what do you bring and how do you do that? And obviously also from me as someone who is not originally from Turkey, coming in, right, and then learning everything about the culture here, and deciding what to bring from the Nordic countries, maybe from my own country, from all of this, I think is a very interesting topic that I would love to talk to you about and hear your thoughts.
All right. So my where I broke into the industry was localization. Interesting thing about localization was that instead of just translating stuff, wherever possible, especially in casual games and especially nowadays in even big Hollywood productions, you localize. You basically take something that existed and then you apply the local norms and filters on top of it, and then you create something that is 80% the original and 20% local flavor, or vice versa, but it doesn't matter. What I've seen is that in our industry, when you create, especially in your case, for example, you will never be a silo. You will not be a studio that just does, oh, they just do that by themselves and that's going to be that. Of course, there are examples of exactly what I'm talking about as well, but they're not part of our or they're not part of your quest, so understanding the personality in a way, the value set of the company as a whole, and understanding the values and the personality of the local, I'm going to say, call it the local flavor, and integrating them together. There's always a number of hard facts that come into play anyway. The moment you open another studio in another country, your first layer is the regulations will change. Your work time might be different. The way you give vacations might be different. The way parental leaves work might be different, etc. So you will always have like some hard facts that you can't really change anyway, but making sure that your people, making sure that as a leader, you yourself, in this case, because Lisa, you're a great example of this, you yourself know and understand what ticks globally as the personality of the overall company, and then showcasing this by leading by example where you are is what I think is the one thing that needs to be done, whatever else. The rest is probably like, we could all probably sit down and spend like 6 months each and then write a couple of books about this. But I think this is the key point. The bridges that connect the new studio to the parent or the other studios across, these bridges need to lead by example, and this example needs to be consistent. In my mind, that would be the one thing I would, go for, and then the rest situational, you do as needed. But I think that would be the first thing I would think of. Hopefully it makes sense.
It does.
What?
And I think it goes also over to the first topic we talked about, the integrity, right? Again, every culture has its own flavor, so to speak, right? In Turkey, we keep saying we will do it as things arise. As we say in Turkish, hallederiz. That's the Turkish term we use, right? And I think it's creating organization within chaos, or managing chaos in an own flavored way, let's say. When you come over from a company that is well known for how it operates and how it has using tools and tech and all of that, and then you build a new studio outside of a comfort zone that we have been dealing with, let's say, the first question to ask is how much freedom do I let that team run self-sufficiently, and how much micromanagement do I apply? And micromanagement sounds always bad. I know nobody likes to micromanage, but micromanagement is setting boundaries. Boundaries might be, hey, we have defined working hours where we have overlaps between the headquarter and the new studio, right? That's the micromanagement level that the studio might apply. The freedom might be, we don't mind what communication tool you use. You don't need to use the same tool as long as we have a report out of you guys. I mean, it's a weird example I have given for the freedom aspect. It's really like, what does the headquarter sustain with the new studio, and how much influence does the studio allow to operate the way you wish and the way it makes sense? Also the regulations Onurhan mentioned, because certain aspects you can work around, right? France has different working hours. I think they don't work 40 hours, but 36.5 or something along those lines, for example. So you can't then force them to work 40 hours by regulation, right? But you might say, okay, 30 is the most overlap we have between France studio and, let's say, headquarter in Germany. And that's what we need to make velocity-wise the highest peak for all of us, right? And as such, all those slowdowns that we might have as a studio are taken out of those 36 hours the studio in France would have to cooperate with us. So basically, the bottom line of what I'm trying to say is simple. You as a studio have to define what you expect, and then what you might in a new way, which might also influence your culture, right? Your culture might be very, let's say, hierarchy approval driven. So you couldn't move a needle without the highest to say, yeah, you can move that needle. But you might say, oh, there is a studio, they organize chaos in their own way, and actually it makes sense because we have seen a very good outcome. We might change our culture to that as well, right? It doesn't need to be always studio telling the headquarter telling the new studio you found how to operate it. Vice versa can also be that the new studio inspires how the culture of the headquarter and the corporate has been to the better.
Thank you so much. I have a follow-up question then, because I mean, in my case, I was very lucky, let's be honest, because I lived in Sweden for almost 5 years, or 4.5 years, a bit longer. So I got to know the Nordic mindset. So making the bold choice of not hiring a Turkish local person here on site, right, might seem bold, but on the other hand, it actually meant we can hire someone here who can bring the Nordic mindset, from the parent company, like Onurhan called it. So I think the calculation there adds up, and I was incredibly lucky that I was also able to onboard for the first 2 months from one of the local studios to get to know everyone, learn the local flavor, to stay with that word that you chose of the company itself. But my question then is also then a bit simpler. What is good company culture to you?
Being trusted will be the first one, because if I'm hired, I have been hired for a reason, right? Either because of my experience, my skill, or the person I am can also be a reason, right, for certain roles. So being trusted is the first one, and define how we create trust and how we sustain trust between each other, right? That's the most important aspect. The second one, how we want to communicate, because I mean, we all have that, right? In meetings, we all adopt the F-bomb from time to time. I mean, it shouldn't be, it's inappropriate, I know. But if we are not, basically as a company, if we don't take things too serious, if we are casual with each other and we have a fine line of humor and jokes, and that's defined, then it's cool. If we wouldn't be able to be ourselves, basically, I would have a hard time to first integrate into the company, and second to find myself enjoying that culture. And then the third aspect from my aspect is the freedom, really, the empowerment, as we also say from a production point of view, right? What can I do on my own without having to go all the way up to tell somebody that I'm applying a different process or a different approach how we talk to each other, right? So basically the trust, how we gain and sustain it, then the integrity and the freedom within integrity, and the last one is the empowerment, is a big aspect that defines culture. If you micromanage me, like as certain industries do, where they take in when they start and take out when they end, right? That wouldn't be our culture, because all we know from the past experiences, video game development doesn't stop in this 8 hours, right? I mean, I might not physically sit in front of a PC for, after 8 hours, but I might still think about this one process or tool or whatever game design aspect I was thinking about throughout the day, throughout the night, right? That is still working, even if technically you're not sitting in front of PC. And If the company would force me to limit that to the 8 hours, I would say, well, that's a missed opportunity. Vice versa, if the company says, hey, we don't have co-working hours, everybody can work as they wish and come back anytime as they wish, that would also not create a team spirit and a collaborative environment for all of us.
I wouldn't mind working in that in the first company whose values you kind of laid out pretty nicely. I'm going to take a swing from a different direction to Lisa's question. In this specific kind of case of like opening another studio for an existing company, the company culture I would want to work in as a potential new employee, in that case, would be the company culture where the core values of the parent company is reflected. For example, Fatih gave an awesome set of core values, right? And we all want to work there. That's fine, and that's situational for me again, in the sense of, in this day and age, people our age, people coming from our background, similarly, more or less, we want somewhere like this. We want empowerment. We want to be respected within our skill set. We want, etc., etc. But I think the reality is, if we take a look at it from a very high level management science perspective, is when you're doing this kind of move of expanding the company to another locale, the goal should be to reflect the core values of the company. Because, for example, when you're looking for a job, let's say that you're like, a fresh graduate, or you want to change, when you're looking for a job, no company whatsoever in our industry, as far as I know, as far as the languages I know, they never tell you, oh, we have 5 offices and here are the core values differently by office. Like in Singapore, we strive for perfection. In the US, we strive for empowerment. Like, they are always the same. So in my mind, the company should always be reflecting those core values. And one thing, like you said, is expanding to another culture could actually change those core values over time. And that's perfectly natural too. Because companies definitely need to evolve. One thing, I think, the bridges of culture and communication, acting between different spots in any company, whether this is a different office, this is a different department somewhere else, different studio, or even within the same building, these bridges need to also understand the reality and the subtlety and the importance of indirect communication, and how culture impacts that. So, for example, Fatih mentioned in the Turkish way of working, there's a lot of hallederiz, which is, we will take care of it. It sounds very, to a German-minded person, to a Nordic-minded person, it sounds very ephemeral. It sounds very like, we will take care of it. Like, give me some details, bro. Like, I need a timeline. Give me a bit of a tangible something, right? And that, even if they are reluctant to give you those tangible details at that point, if they're highly professional people, if they have high integrity, it kind of circles back to it, they will definitely take care of it. And that's fact. In leadership positions, you need to also know, like, when you're pushing and pulling, you need to play the push and pull effect within communication really smartly. And really engaging in open and clear communication takes care of this problem of hallederiz, we will take care of it. But it also, when you hear that, you should also think of the past track record, and then have a bit of trust and faith, and then ask later the details, but have a bit of trust and faith in the fact that, yes, they will take care of it, and they will probably, most likely, take care of it in the same quality that they took care of it last time. Now, I'm not saying that this is good management or good practice or good communication, but there's also that. And we all worked with outsourcers as well. And as much as we try to make the relationship as professional as possible, sometimes you sit down with an outsourcer planning for the next project for the next 2 years, and then you will know, coming from production, that when they tell you, oh yeah, we can manage that, that's actually the most amount of detail they can probably give you at that given time. But the reality is, the subtlety of the unspoken word, the subtlety of the indirect communication plays a role in there. And I think that's really important in relation to expanding to another culture. This culture, at this instance, being another company too.
But I think we agree on the 3 most important parts for good company culture, studio culture, are empowerment, autonomy, and trust. I think
Indeed.
that's what Fatih said, and I fully sign up to that.
Yes. Draft the papers, Fatih.
I'm gonna throw a spanner into the works now. So we talk about the core values of a business, and we want to replicate that worldwide across several different locations. Now, if you look at it from a perspective of they're coming in and that people are coming into the business and they're replicating that culture and upholding that, do we also want to continue adding to that culture? And how do we ensure that we add to the culture that we already have? Because look, I recently saw a quote, and it's culture doesn't live in a place, it lives within our lives. So how do we continue adding on to that culture is a question that I have for you, all of you.
It's a good question, but I guess it really, as what I said previously, it's like every country, every culture has its own way to operate things, right? And you might have this black and white view as a company, right? Black and white in the sense of how we define trust and mistrust, right? And then there might be an aspect that is not black or white, but it might be somewhere gray in between that might change. And then you might say, hey, that's great. For example, the tendency, and again, I'm speaking very global and generic here, the company C-level usually shares as much as people need to know, right, before going to the details, because the details might not add value or might create uncertainty or whatever reasons, right? But in some cultures, the details are most critical. For example, with people that what I'm trying to say is I have people from Asia, they need in their task creation quite some details, right? For two reasons. First is to have a clarity on what is being expected, and second, to know how to get there. Basically, they build their own roadmap. In some other cultural aspects, team member wise, I'm talking here, I can create a very generic task, which is like develop this or create this piece of art, right? And they will then make it to an effort to actually whoever needs that piece of art to make an approach and collaborate, right? So the culture, what I'm trying to say is there is this one culture that might need clarity, very broken down wall of text to get something moving, vice versa, where the other culture might actually like it more to be generic as a task to then empower collaboration with others, right? And have that clarity to also create this integrity of, hey, we work on this together. The company culture might be, we need to create tasks like by the books. It's all written out, but that might stop the collaboration with others because everything is answered. Why would I need to reach out to Lisa to understand what exactly she needs, right? So that might be my company and versus how we operate locally. And that operation on a local level might inspire us to change our culture to say, hey, we don't define it like by books. We give people freedom and we empower collaboration, because collaboration is what we need as a team to succeed together.
Yeah, I would add to that culture or the values are a good baseline, right? That's kind of what we strive to achieve. This is what we find a common understanding on, right? But they evolve over time, right? If the company changes due to different locations, due to studio growth, due to maybe different games they're making, or any other structural changes, right? The values might also change along the way, or just add up, be more, right? You probably also did these value exercises for yourself, where you sit down with a list of, I don't know, 50 or whatever, and try to drill them down to 2. If not, it's a fun exercise. Go ahead and do it. And they change over time as well, right? So my values, what I need and what I value most in this year might be different in 3 years. So I think it's totally fair to assume that they can change over time, or that they mean something else to us, like envision, enable, achieve. Instead, it can be vision, enable, adapt, achieve.
Okay, so interesting question in the sense that like we never expect things to be like monolithic in game dev. Like things should be quite fluid. Yes, even company values will change, core values will change, and culture will change. And good companies will usually make a whole branding out of it so that it's not out of place. But the change happens in two ways. One is evolution, like a word that we used before, where technically the technical definition is more like slow, you adapt and then slowly changes, etc. Another one is, I just called it basically evolution versus revolution, where change is dramatic, more forceful and instant. When you think of biology and politics, it's the same. But the reality of the matter is that this is all change. And in order for change to happen, you need to be willing to experiment. In order to experiment successfully, in order to experiment in an effective and in a non-heartbreaking way, let's put it this way, the company needs to be able to provide the room to fail. Not every experiment is going to succeed. So there's a very in the background, very hiding, very in the darkness hiding but smiling. There's a sense of psychological safety that comes into play for anything or any company to evolve and change. Otherwise, I call it, you guys probably heard this before from me. If you don't remember, it's an awesome term. I call it the banhammer. You cannot bring the banhammer down and then say like, okay, now we're going to change our core value from this to this. Well, awesome. Good luck with that. Or every one person who doesn't agree with that particular dramatic change, whatever the content of the change is, will say goodbye, and they will take away a piece of the culture of the company with themselves and leave. We call this, the hollowed out companies. There are a lot of companies that get hollowed out at some point because they get acquired or they get major changes in the top levels or whatever, So I think there needs to be a willingness to experiment, and there needs to be a willingness to accept failure as a natural outcome of experimenting for companies' core values or cultures to change, to evolve, and to not be stagnant. And I think that's, I really believe that's key. Now, Selim, please ask the question. I rudely interrupted.
No, it's okay. There's some very valid points there. And as Lisa's asked this question, and it's quite important for her, given that IO Interactive and Lisa has gone over to Istanbul, set up the office. So what changes have you actually seen coming and setting up a new studio to the culture, to the values of IO so far?
Big question. I have to think. That's why I'm like, So I wouldn't say I've seen changes to values yet, but I've seen positive changes that we might have made to the local industry, or we're trying to make, right? Because one of the things we bring with us is a very strong work-life balance mindset, right? Which is strong in the Western European countries anyways, but even stronger in the Nordic countries, right? I think when I moved from the UK to Sweden, I walked on the floor at 5 o'clock, was looking for someone and was wondering, why is it so empty? Right? It's because people leave on time, and that might also mean, if they start early, they really leave early. So it's a very family-friendly, work-friendly, healthy mind country in that sense, right? So the work culture is strong there, and I love that that this is something I was able to bring here, or that we are bringing here as a company, right? So our employees really appreciate that they work their 8 hours, and then they can go home. Nobody's holding them to overtime, and I think this is not something that's very common in Turkey. And I know that also usually is paid very well, but people have to make their choice about incredibly high pay or working until 10, 11 every night. And I think this is something where I'm happy and very glad that we are having that mindset. So I'm hoping that at least there we can have a positive impact in the long run. Have we changed our values? It's a very good question. We haven't changed our values yet, but we also had to work on making sure that now, for example, with daylight saving times in the rest of the countries and not here in Turkey, we make sure that we be mindful of the team's time, right? Especially because what I just said regarding work-life balance, right? So now we're 2 hours apart and 3 hours to the UK. So we have to keep that in mind and have to remind people. So we're growing and learning as we go with our studios.
Amazing. Thank you. It's interesting to hear that, because I've known from a cultural perspective, there's a lot of overtime in Turkey. And it's also what I've found when speaking to folks over there is that there is this expectation for people to work those sort of hours, and the pay is lower. To have that influence of work-life balance from the offset, it must be refreshing for the people that are joining you, and it's setting precedent for other studios in the local market, hopefully, to follow suit. Anyone? Onurhan?
I have something. That's where the overriding macro culture kind of comes into play. Turkey is highly there are ways of classifying countries in relation to how they view work. Turkey is highly capitalistic in that regard. You are expected to work. The value you feel as a person is quite intimately tied to the work that you do. And I am Turkish, I can say this, and this is not a critique, it's an observation, but often, in order to look busy and to feel successful, and there's nothing wrong with it in that sense, people will arrange the chairs on the Titanic's deck, as we say, because they will put in the time. We also are in an industry where in the previous generation, and by generation I mean like up to 2015, let's say, putting in overtime was seen as a badge of honor. And that was the reflection of the generation before, up to, let's say, 2000s, because a lot of things need to be done. But there is a reality of the fact that this type of change that IO Interactive and Lisa and the team there are pushing comes into play with the same mindset that a lot of Turkish studios, realizing the value of mental health and work-life balance, realizing the fact that if somebody keeps on working 11 hours for 1 year, you're basically losing them. And they're losing effectiveness, they're losing parts of themselves for the long run. So that's a really important thing to carry over, to marry that type of best practice in a way. It's a cultural practice, but best practice taken from the Nordics and bringing it over to Turkey, because it's also refreshing and it makes life much easier and worthwhile working in that type of culture for the people here, there.
Like you said, it's not sustainable over a long period of time. And then what you will find is the productivity will go down. So ensuring work-life balance is put into place. It's one of the most important aspects of workplace culture, is what I believe in. Amazing. Onurhan, over to you with your topic. So we'll bridge that in. So the do's and don'ts and differences of scope.
So sustainability is the bridge here. I wanted to ask about your experiences from different perspectives now, because after we stopped working actively together, we all went our own ways in a way. About the do's and don'ts of keeping your scope, your project scope, your game scope in check. And the do's for me are always as important as the don'ts. And I just want to start by saying like my one go-to, because there will be, again, lots of different ways of dealing with this, mechanical ways, mindset ways, a marriage of hard skills and soft skills. But one thing I tend to try to do, let's say, is once you've defined what your project is about, once you've defined what your USP, your core pillars, etc., what they are, I think the first thing that needs to happen is to start defining already a common language around the project, a common terminology. So that's like the do part. So, let's say that we're all a production team for an awesome game in the company that Fatih is building, and we're signing the papers for next. Lisa is preparing the legal stuff in the background. Let's say that we're working on this new project and we're working with a publisher. So when I say, for example, enemy, or when Fatih says the core feature, one of the cars in the game, etc., I think all of these objects, all of these things in the game first need to be defined. What do I mean by a level? What do I mean by a map? What do I mean by an encounter, a scene? All of these need to be defined for people to be able to share an understanding, a common understanding of that thing without fail. I'm going to put it this way, where like 80% of the time we know exactly what we're talking about when I say one word. And as we interact so this is the do part. Do create a common terminology and use it and define it well. And then the don't part is when you're talking about this common terminology that we created, don't say random things to random people. Don't go and promise something that is misunderstood in terminology, or that is something outside of the terminology to somebody internal or external. Because internally, as leadership people, you will have a lot of people come and ask you a question about what are we doing about X, and then you need to give an answer. But this X needs to be very well understood by everybody. And when I'm giving the answer about what I'm doing about the X, I need to be able to refer to a common or one main source of truth, starting with our terminology and then going with our either project management or what have you. So in a way, for me, this sounds very ephemeral and very mindset based, but I think a lot of applications from this can come down and become process. We worked in projects where you deliver a terminology document saying, when I say an enemy, I mean this. When I say an NPC, I mean this. But that would be my go-to first step. Define the terminology, use it, champion it, and then don't use it haphazardly and don't say random things to random people about this terminology. So what were the things, the various applications, various practices you did to keep a scope in check?
I guess I can go next. I have actually a contradictory example, maybe. We all try to avoid feature creep, right, as production members. I mean, we are in charge of time, quality, and budget, and obviously feature creep can eat up time and or budget, and even at some points, it can even risk the quality. But remember when we were meant to just prototype climbing mechanics in VR space, right? That was the cornerstone, right? That would be our do. Go and prototype climb mechanics. And the don't would be don't do anything else, because it is feature creep by our definition, right? Just giving up that terminology here. But as we were prototyping the climb mechanics for the climb and obviously Robinson the Journey, we have also seen that people start asking for leaderboards. Hey, this would be cool if we had leaderboards, right? By definition, our stance as production members should have been, hey, this is not what is requested, stop feature creeping, right? So I'm not a fan of feature creeping, but it is unavoidable. At certain times, initially in the pre-production phase, concept discovery, you might end up having feature creep. And I think it's clear, and as you said, we need to define what we want to stand for, right? The terminologies, the quality gates we want to walk through. But on the other hand, we also need to define where the team can go crazy with ideas and where we maybe say, hey, ideas are stretch goals or no more accepted after a certain development of stage, where we just develop in a linear fashion our goal to bring it on the street and to release it, basically. But by definition, I don't want to say stop feature creep. I would rather say define where feature creep is fine, and maybe define even what type of feature creep you want, right? Any value that can come up from a creepy idea that might not fit in schedule and quality and budget might be a great addition, right? Again, using the leaderboard aspect of the climb, it wasn't the brief and would have been considered as feature creep, yet it did add a lot of value and made it to a product at the end of the day. That's the one do and don't where things can contradictory. And then the second example I can bring to the table is, obviously we have people that have to work certain core hours, right? From 9 to 5 or 10 to 5 or whatever those might be from company to company. But again, as I said previously, for certain people, creativity doesn't start and end at certain set boundaries, right? Using an example from our concept art team, we had concept artists who would come in at 11 because they will also stay long. And again, they would be working the 8 hours, but artists are that way, right? They need a quiet aspect where they can actually do great work when they are not surrounded by people or being dragged into meetings and distracted from the piece of art they're concepting for weeks and weeks and weeks, let's say, right? So the don't enforce them to come on time if it has a bad output aspect. The do is give them the trust to say, hey, I know you're coming late and I know you are making to a point to go and talk to people to be up to date what we discuss in the Scrum team. That might not even impact them directly because they're working on a concept for weeks and days again. And we don't need them to be in stand-ups just for the sake of stand-ups. They can bypass. So basically for me, that's the contradictory part. As manager, we want to have all team members always there for stand-ups. But over time, I have seen stand-ups have also a critical group of people that need to exchange information, right? The technical artist or the concept artist or the sound designer might not have anything to add as a value and or gain as a value in that stand-up because it's been all about the initial designs and the feasibilities or constraints we need to deal with, right? And that might not impact yet sound design. So why force somebody in there, especially if you disrupt his or her creativity, so to speak? So two contradictory topics, but I would want to know your aspect. So on the one hand, feature creep, do you think it is a no-go by definition and we should avoid it by any cost? And the second aspect is to enforce people to follow a strict process, which might have an impact on their creativity. Because as a producer, again, both would be don'ts for us, right?
I'm going to answer the first question, not this one. I'm going to answer Onurhan's question first, and then I think we can open the other topic. I side with Onurhan on the topic of clear documentation or briefings, right? To make sure that everybody knows what we're talking about. Because if we describe a feature, there are many ways to interpret this, and this can go radically wrong and bigger than we might have expected. So I think very clear documentation and a sign-off of what said feature or character or whatever it is. I recently heard somebody say that there's only one priority one. And I think actually this is very good and something to remember, because when we talk about prioritization, this is the highest priority and this is the highest priority. We often go 1, 1, 2, or something like this, but there can only really be one priority one, So if you talk to people, like, what is the most important thing, to make that clearer? So this is probably something that we on production side have to work on. One thing that we worked on with Need for Speed was change requests, right? After a certain point, if there is a change or an addition or any kind of scope creep, they have to go through a process, a validation process of what is it? Give us a description. Someone on production side, give it a rough cost estimate, maybe already touch base with a couple of people of, is this possible or not? In our case, it was like, oh, we feel like there's a blind spot or there's a hole in the story. Can we add another 30, 40 seconds cinematic? We're like, okay, it's a real-time cinematic, potentially that's possible. So, we were looking into this and then went through a process of approval where then in the end, production and the highest stakeholders have to approve that this is yay or nay. So there was a gated process for this, which is something I also like. And then lastly, something I've seen been done wrong in my point of view is sometimes we, of course, seen people overpromise and underdeliver. Yeah. But I think for me, what's almost worse is that we work with stakeholders, and it can be your EP, your CEO, but in our case, often also IP stakeholders, right? Like or externals, it can be your publishing producers, etc. They ask for something, and we don't dare to say no, right? We know what our team can deliver, and we already feel like, this is a crazy ask, or this is a push, or this will actually change everything we worked on for the last 2 months. Don't be afraid to say that, because they're also humans, right? They have great ideas, but they don't necessarily always assume that their idea will become a reality. But in some of these conversations I've witnessed, just because they were working for very big companies that are with us for our whole childhood, and they have a crazy good idea in this moment, that people went, okay, yes, this is what we have to do now, even though they might have been brainstorming. They might have, it's like a creative director sitting there. I don't know, you could make it, green, for example, and then somebody goes and changes it into green, even though this was just an example of, we could change it in a way that. So I think this is very important to talk to people that are maybe above us in the food chain, I guess. Manage expectations. I think is very important, and tell people, like, if something is really not feasible and would break the team, that we actually say, hold on, wait a minute. I think we have to be a bit protective there.
You guys don't have P0s, because we so we have P1s and 3s and 5s, and now we said we have P0. It's like P0 means it has to happen no matter what.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. It's very interesting in the sense that, like, Fatih gave an example of, okay, so the name for it gets a bad reputation, feature creep, whereas when you look into history of gaming, a lot of awesome franchises have started with some kind of a feature creep gone wrong, which ended up being gone very right, which goes into, we should allow people to be able to experiment, and the culture needs to provide the safety to experiment, etc. That's really interesting. I have this theory that everything in gaming is intersectional and nothing happens in a vacuum. Like, everything is happening all at the same time, and when they all work together beautifully, like an orchestra, you end up delivering something that's amazing, right? But defining a way to deal with that particular feature creep ties into what Lisa said around gated processes that have a set definition, a set way of following things through, where you also define value, because somebody at the end during that process looks at, okay, so I have this awesome idea, it's going to cost this much, so it's going to have a value of arbitrarily defined value of X, and then something, I cannot make this happen in the given time or budget or resources or whatever technology, so something like something of similar value needs to drop. So what do I look at? So then you go to your P0s, P1s, and P2s, and there a lot of like If any junior production project management people are listening to this, please take this out as an example, as a learning. If everything's a priority, nothing is a priority. You need to rethink the way you either create that list or the way you rank that list. But that is the key thing that's going to lead you to. I really love this example by Lisa. There's a certain pragmatic power of being able to say no. And without saying no, if everything is a yes, it's not sustainable. You're trying to do a soup of everything, and then you probably at the very end try to add a lot of salt to it to add some flavor, and then everybody hates it.
I think it's probably a good time and a bad time for feature creep as well, right? Or scope creep. And if you have some play tests or something like this, right? Like open play tests, and you realize, oh my God, the players don't get it. We have to change something, right? Then this is where the value comes in, that like you just said as well, right? Then this is where like, okay, now we have to push hard to get this in. But also we have to then potentially, if possible, cut something else, right? Or something else has to be off the table or pushed to DLC or whatever. And we know in reality that that's not always possible. We have been there. It's not always possible. Sometimes everything is too important to cut or to reduce. But then, we lower the quality maybe instead of removing something completely.
I think what could help with prioritization, I mean, again, I'm not here to brag about a specific aspect because I don't think there is a right or wrong in how to approach it. But what we did for Hunt and that we sustained since then is we used the Ark Survival scorecard, which has, do we want it as a team? Does our committee want it? Is it good for our business? Sometimes it might be good for the player, but bad for our business, right? And you start having this contradictory, do I deliver it? Because it's something the community wants, but actually it's not that great for our business, right? Then the fourth pillar in that aspect is how easy it is to implement. I mean, you have a rough guesstimation and then you create a score. And in our case, score can be positive or negative, and then you set a priority, right? It's an important aspect because sometimes you might value something so much that you feel like it's going to make this new aspect or new approach that everybody will enjoy. But then the reality is your community actually doesn't want that, nor is it that great of a deal from a feasibility point of view, even if it does benefit your business a lot. And then you might put that idea to the shelves and never come back to it, right? So I do agree with you guys. If everything's a priority, nothing is a priority. But for us, for example, the most important aspect has been, what do we feel is important to us, right? And then we have different priorities from different people. And then when you have that list, what you can do is, where do we match actually? For example, I guess if I would ask an artist and designer, somebody else, a coder, the outcome is we want to make the game run stable, right? That's the highest priority. So make the game run stable. That's a common priority. Okay, cool. The second one might be make it easy to learn how to master. Again, I'm just going simple examples, right? And then something starts like, hey, I do feel like the world should be this big and this small and whatever. You might say, okay, that is not our core priority. It might be a feasibility question, then a quality and a value we might create or not, right? And I think this is really to go at priorities. We can't make everything a priority, but find common priorities that the team can stand behind.
So just on that, I think it's very important to define what sort of player experience we want and what we truly believe in when developing a game. And I think where you were talking about those scorecards as well, Fatih, what we don't want to do is perhaps demotivate that team when they're coming up with such amazing ideas. But if it's creeping in the scope and we're too far ahead, what can also happen is we plan them for DLCs moving forward in the future because we don't want to lose the creativity. The scorecard idea is incredible, but you've also got to ensure that we're not sort of cutting corners when you're going through those testing phases, which Lisa touched upon as well. Want to ensure we're testing and it's of the highest quality possible. So there were some very, very important points there, and I just wanted to add my 2 pence to it.
Awesome. And I also love scorecards.
Yes, definitely. And what you mentioned, Selim, is for people who are keen on the business of games, and for those people who understand games as products, the world is full of games, especially I call them medium-sized games that released with a scope that was seemingly full, but then you could definitely see like either as paid or free DLC, you can see all those ideas that were on the board that checked all of that scored highly on Fatih's cards that couldn't be done because we need to hit a certain release date, etc. That were added 3 months later, 6 months later, 3 months later, 6 months later. There are a lot of ideas like this, and we also know that gaming, when it's funded, when it's crowdfunded via Kickstarter, works exactly like this. It basically works exactly like this. And I think overall, having clarity on what matters when, understanding the core point that the game is trying to achieve, they're all very valuable. And while you're trying to do that, you're going to need to push your marketing people away and say like, sorry, no, we can't do this unless you get me X more time. Sorry, EP, I can't really do this unless you land me a bunch of programming power, etc. Being able to say no, to keep it in check, and everybody knowing what they are saying no and yes to is quite important. Thanks for all the input. The scorecards, yes, we're gonna have to rebrand them, or I don't mind paying royalties to Fatih, so that's what it is.
Smile cards.
Smile cards. I love that term. We should trademark that immediately.
Smile cards. Love it. As a wrap, if we were to talk about these topics now, the importance of integrity and skill, we come to the conclusion that it's all on a case-by-case basis, right? It depends on what your why is, what your situation is, what you're hiring for, and where you're at with things. Anything else to add to that, Fatih?
I think that's a great summary.
Yeah. And then Lisa, in terms of building culture.
All good. I think we agree, and I'm very happy. Thank you.
And then lastly, Onurhan.
Nothing to add. Be ready for everything, anytime, anywhere, any place, and then be ready to say no. Make your due diligence. Trust your people. Trust yourself. Go and do. Games are fun.
Actually, I have one addition. I have one last addition. I think it's an important aspect as a hiring manager as well. Be yourself. Like in the recruitment process, when you work with a team, when you approach a task, be always yourself. Basically, don't act as you can push the boundaries if you can't, and vice versa. Don't underestimate the value you add just because you're shy. And I think be authentic is a key aspect, really. In all the do's, be the integrity, culture, and the do's and don'ts, be yourself. That's the most important tagline I can throw today.
Yes, Sensei.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's been a good session. Some very good ideas, which I genuinely appreciate, and I think the ranks out there within the gaming community will also appreciate. And I think there's a lot of things that people can take on and see value in. So thank you so much for attending and being a part of it. That's a wrap.
Thanks
Happy
for
to be
hosting
here.
us.
To the UK,
Do we-
like this.
Do we say
All black crew?
welcome to Pixel Perspective Black Edition 1?
Black Edition.